Hello everyone, thanks for tuning into today's video. I'm going to have a look at whether the next 8 to 10 days in today's video. This takes us to the end of January. I think day 10 is the last day of the month. So we've had this cold snap over the past few days, but I think we're going to be losing that very shortly. It's on its way out today, really. And we're going to have a much milder Atlantic-driven pattern as we're going through to the end of January, and that will take us into the start of February as well, most probably. So we're going to be reverting back to the pattern that we had earlier in January and, of course, into December. Hopefully it won't be as wet. I'm not seeing signs of a deluge coming along, but hopefully it won't be as wet. But it will be more unsettled and it will be milder to end the month. So that takes us into the start of February. We are seeing signs of a sudden stratospheric warming potentially occurring over the North Pole through the first week of February. So I'll have a look at the detail on that in a second. It can translate that to an increased risk of blocking colder weather. We get this sudden stratospheric warming over the pole. But there are a few caveats associated with it. So I'll be discussing all of that in a second. But before we get on with that, just to say about the ads, there's links to articles on all the pages at Gazovis. Have a browse through widgets and click through the links if there's any articles that you're interested in, and thanks very much for doing that. There's video ads on most pages which open up the content. When you've watched them, they'll close back up again, and it is helping to pay for our website. And just say thanks so much to everybody for all of their kind messages relating to the sad news of the passing of my dad last week. So thanks to everybody that's messaged me, tweeted me, and emailed. You really have been so kind over the past few weeks. It's been a tremendous comfort to myself and to my family as well. So thanks very much to everybody for doing that. Right, we'll start off with the stratosphere. So this is from the Japanese Meteorological Agency. This is telling us what the temperature is doing at 30 HPA, and that's right at the top of the atmosphere in the stratosphere over the North Pole. So the grey line is the trend line at this time of the year. The black line tells us where we've been with those stratospheric temperatures through this season. So we go back to September, right at the start of the season, and you see that it was in November, which is just here, that we had a huge plunge in the temperature in the stratosphere over North Pole. A dramatic drop took place, and those cold stratospheric temperatures then have stayed with us up to where we are now. We have been getting some little minor warmings, but it's still significantly below average in terms of the temperature in the stratosphere over the North Pole up to where we are now. It's been a very cold season in terms of those stratospheric temperatures over pole so far, and that of course has probably helped to enhance the westerlies that we've had through this winter so far. Well, it's been such a mild winter, or one of the reasons anyway, is that we've had a cold stratosphere over the pole, which has increased the polar vortex, particularly around Greenland, and that has driven, given us this Atlantic-driven pattern. It's driven the westerlies that we have seen. Now, as I said, we have got some signs as we go through to the start of February that we might get a sudden stratospheric warming event taking place. If that happens, what we'll see on this graph is that the black line will do something like that. Within a couple of days, it will absolutely shoot up in a very dramatic fashion. They really do look very dramatic when these events take place on these graphs. So if we get this stratospheric warming over North Pole, it'll be very interesting to have a look at this chart and see how quickly that black line shoots up. But potentially that's the kind of thing it will do. And it's really the GFS model that is seeing this change to a stratospheric warming over the North Pole. So this is from the GFS, from the website meteosil.fr. This is the forecast of the stratospheric temperatures over the North Pole. So we've got these blue and purple colours. That's the cold stratosphere that we've had through this winter so far. These green and yellow colours around the edges of the pole, and by the 29th we're really starting to penetrate in a little bit towards the North Pole. That is where warming is taking place in the stratosphere. So let's run through the last days of January and into the start of February. And you see very little change really. We keep those cold stratospheric temperatures going up to the 2nd and 3rd of February. There we go, the blue colours are still in there. albeit pushed a little bit further south than the actual top of the pole, where it has turned a bit warm. But it is a sudden stratospheric warming event that is going on here. However, as we go through to the 4th of February, look at this. Suddenly, the red colours start to appear, and a very dramatic warming event takes place through the 4th, 5th, into the 6th of February. When those red colours turn up, that's telling you that the temperature is shooting up in the stratosphere over the North Pole, and that's beginning to penetrate into the pole as well. Now, when these warming events occur in the stratosphere, what can happen is that the warmth will propagate down into the troposphere. That's where weather is taking place. And, excuse me, when that happens, we tend to see a bubble of high pressure forming, which is blocking. And blocking tends to be our route to sustain cold northerly and easterly winds. Now, there are a few caveats with this. So what we've got to say first of all is that not all stratospheric warmings or sudden stratospheric warmings propagate down. So it's possible that this warmth will just stick in the stratosphere. It won't go down to the troposphere, and it won't set up the high pressure. So we've got to see whether if this comes off, as the GFS model is indicating, and it's indicated consistently that we get this warming in the stratosphere, we've got to see whether the warmth propagates down into the troposphere. That's the first thing. The next thing is that there's a time delay on the warming event taking place and then getting the blocking. So that can be anything from 2 to 4 weeks. So it may not be until the very end of February, even into March, that we start to see blocking from this if it comes off. And the other caveat that we always have to say about all of this is just simply that the blocking might not sit in the right place, really. As I always say, it's one thing to get blocking over the pole, but you have to get it in the right place, if you see what I mean, to deliver cold weather. So it's possible we will be on the mild side of the blocking, and somewhere else, such as America or Asia, is on the cold side of the blocking. So there are a lot of caveats. It's not a guarantee of anything, but it is interesting that the GFS is seeing this sudden stratospheric warming event occurring consistently through the start of February. This is from the 5th of March 2013. This is the last time we had a major sudden stratospheric warming event. And this did eventually lead to some very cold weather, particularly as we got into March 2013. We had a severely cold month. I'm sure you remember it. It was something like the coldest March since 1883, I think, depending on what average you use. So it's a very, very cold March that occurred after this warming event. This really was the start of it, and things got more severe then through the winter. So this is from the 5th of January. You see those red colours there across Siberia and penetrating in to the North Pole. And what happened through that first week of January 2013 is that basically the polar vortex, which is indicated by the blue colours, the cold temperatures in the stratosphere over the pole, basically that was destroyed. And we go through to the 12th of January here, and you notice there's no blue at all over the top of the pole. We basically killed the polar vortex, and that was a very dramatic event that occurred during the first week of January 2013. As I say, it did eventually lead us into what was really quite a severe pattern as we got through into March. Now, that was in January. But what the warming event we're looking at now probably doesn't reach this quite that level anyway, and the warming event we've got now is through the first week of February. So we're probably looking at this impact in the spring, actually, more than the winter. But we'll certainly be keeping an eye on it and see how things develop, whether this sudden stratospheric warming event does actually come off. So just watch your space on that one. Right, let's get on with the weather the next 8 to 10 days. So we've got the 500 height anomaly flow charts. We've got the east of the Earth here on the top, I should say, and the GFS is on the bottom. Red is extrapolating to high pressure, blue is extrapolating to low pressure. So what the ECM is seeing is that we've got a big ridge here in the next 8 to 10 days time, sitting down to the south, and then we've got a trough up to the north. We've got the tight lines here indicating the jet stream coming through the Atlantic into the UK. So this is a classic Atlantic driven pattern to end January. The final 10 days of the month, we'll see the westerlies returning. Most unsettled close to that trough in the north and west, driest in the south and southeast, but we will all get some bands of rain coming through at times. And basically, it's just a return of the westerlies for the end of January. That's the East NUF. And the GFS, that's the GFS, that's the East NUF. The GFS is very similar. So again, we've got that trough of low pressure to the north. We've got the ridge of above average heights with the GFS down to the south. There's the westerlies coming through. So again, we end January with a westerly Atlantic driven pattern. It'll be most unsettled in the northwest. It'll be driest in the south and southeast. But yeah, the westerlies are coming back, and we can see this on the GFS temperature and precipitation ensembles. The red line here is the 30-year temperature average, so we're still just a little bit below average, but that won't be lasting much longer. By the time we get through to the weekend, we're going to be above average, and we're going to keep things above average generally with those temperatures as we go through to the end of the month and the start of February. This is February the 1st, just here, and you see the trend is definitely to keep the temperatures above average. Associated with that, we've got rainfall spikes as well. As I say, there's no real sign that we're going back to the deluge that we had in December, so hopefully we won't have too many problems with flooding for the end of January and start of February. But it is a more unsettled pattern that we've been in over the past week or so. There will be some rain bands coming through the country associated with this lift in the temperatures. Here's the temperature anomaly for the coming week. You see the cold temperature anomalies are being pushed back in towards Eastern Europe and Western Russia. So deep blue colours for Western Russia, still be severely cold there. But it is warming up from the west. So much of Western Europe actually going above average again from the 21st of January through to the 29th of January. Going above average with those temperature anomalies. The precipitation anomalies turning wetter, so the far south southeast is still a bit drier than average for the coming week. Elsewhere, it's a bit above average. So just have a quick look at the generic charts, and this is the GFS for Monday, and you see the Atlantic is driving in at this point. The high pressure that's given us the cold conditions has collapsed and gone into the east of Europe. We're bringing in these southwesterly winds. There's areas of low pressure, of course, moving in with those southwesterly winds, so there'll be bands of rain coming through. And as we go through next week, it's going to be staying unsettled, really. There's quite a long fetch southwesterly there for Wednesday. That could drag up some very mild air out of the Azores through the middle part of next week. There'll be rain bands in with that as well, perhaps particularly in the north and the west. And then we go through to the end of next week and we keep it unsettled. Here we go for Friday the 29th, for example. And again, it's the idea of high pressure to the south, low pressure to the north, a flat flow coming across the Atlantic, rain bands coming through, but it should be generally quite mild. And that's how we go up to day 10, which is the last day of January. And it's still that idea that high pressure is in across France, the Bay of Biscay, low pressures to the north. There's the westerlies coming through. It's mild and it's unsettled to end January. Having a look at the East NUF, it's all very similar. So Atlantic driving through into the start of next week. There'll be rain bands coming through, but mild air being dragged up from the Azores, so it will be significantly milder compared to the cold snap we had over the past few days. And then we go through to the end of next week, still in that westerly flow. Day 10, which is, again, 31st of January, looks like this. Just bringing a slight swipe of colder air down from the northwest, but that won't last very long. The scenario is still high pressure clinging to Spain and France, which means the flow will stay westerly, flat, and there'll be further bands of rain coming through going inside of February. And finally, the GM, the Canadian model, it's all very, very similar. Atlantic drives through next week, keeps it unsettled, and keeps it generally on the mild side as well. Day 10, again, very much an Atlantic-driven pattern of high pressure to the south, low pressure to the north. There's those westerlies coming through, giving us a mild and unsettled end to January 2013. So the cold snap is on its way out. Whether that is winter, I'm not sure, because we've got this sudden stratospheric warming event possibly occurring through the first week of February. So it could well bring us winter back, and that could happen at the end of February. It could happen into March. So I wouldn't necessarily be saying that this is winter gone. But certainly for the next week to 10 days, we are going into a much milder Atlantic-driven pattern once again. But westerlies will be dominant as we end January. That's all for now. We'll be doing JMA Friday tomorrow, looking at the month ahead with the Japanese model. And that's all for now. Thanks very much for watching.